We're going to go back to our discussion here about the feverish indirect negotiations between Israel and Hamas to come to a ceasefire deal there. I'm joined in the studio by Yariv Oppenheimer. He is the former head of Peace Now, and Ruthie Blum, an editor at the Gatestone Insitute. One of the topics, if we pull back a couple layers of these ceasefire talks, have to do with returning the bodies of 2 Israeli soldiers who were killed back in the 2014 Gaza war. And the question is, should this be one of the conditions to sign the ceasefire or not? And Yariv, I want to get your take first.
The answer should be what we would like to see in the end, what should be the result. If Israel would like to have the bodies back, and of course everyone would like it, so the only way to do it is to have a deal between the Palestinians, between Hamas and Israel, and to release prisoners. Hamas cannot afford itself to give away the bodies, but not getting in return prisoners, at least the prisoners that were retaken after the Shalit deal. This is a condition that will never be followed. The Palestinians will never be ready to give it up. And therefore, if we are taking this issue and making it a precondition, we are stuck in the process, and we might find ourselves in a war in Gaza that it's against our interest, and for sure we will not get the bodies back.
The trouble is that this encourages Hamas to kidnap Israelis. The fact is, they're not only the remains of 2 dead Israelis, there are also 2 live Israelis that we know about being held captive.
We're not sure if they're alive or not, but they are there. But for sure they are there.
They're there, and we pray they're alive, and at the moment we have no reason to assume they're dead. I mean, they're being spoken about as if they're alive. The trouble is that to say that Hamas, we can't get those Israelis back without having a prisoner exchange, you know, that word is a misnomer.
Ruthie, it's fine. If you are against the deal, a prisoners exchange deal, it's fine. You can be against it, but don't make it a precondition, because if Israelis will be killed because of this issue, then whether, I don't know if it's serving our interest. We can go for a war as well if you would like.
No, but Israelis are killed as a result. Anytime those terrorists have been released, like in the Shalit deal, we had to rearrest ones who reoffended.
Not only the one that reoffended.
But the trouble is, I know you were saying that Hamas can't afford, in front of its population, not to get something in return for these bodies, not to get prisoners in return. But what about Israel? The parents of the Israelis who are in Gaza have been begging.
Definitely. This is why I'm in favor of it.
And we've had, no, but it's not just with this deal. When Israel signed a deal with Turkey, there have been several moments in time when Israel could have demanded that these Israelis be released and didn't manage to do so. I don't know whether behind the scenes they did.
But Ruthie, because of the reason that in order for Hamas to give back the bodies, Hamas will demand forever, and even if it will be the last demand before Hamas is breaking down, prisoners. And that is the reason why with the deal with Turkey, it was not on the agenda, because Israel government was not ready to speak about exchange of prisoners.
I know,
and this
I'm
is the
against
issue
the
here.
exchange of prisoners.
Okay, so
I'm saying that that should be not, I know, but it should be not tied to prisoners released, because you're talking about innocent Israelis, also the remains of 2 innocent Israelis, in exchange for live terrorists.
Because you know how many terrorists or how many Hamas people are in Israeli prisons, much more than Israelis within Hamas. So it's not a balancing equation at the beginning.
No, but it's not a moral
But
balance.
Eventually it's also about interest. And if the Israeli interest is to have a negotiation with Hamas and not Israelis being killed by a war between us and Hamas, so we have to understand that the issue of these families and the soldiers and the civilians should be in a different scale, in a different channel. It's not the same channel.
Right. There are some who would argue that Hamas is so desperate at this point that maybe even the pressure from the United States, maybe even those hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to be poured in for rehabilitation projects, for power, for water, they're in real trouble with sewage and electricity outages. Maybe this will make them. Maybe this will make them turn over the bodies.
Unfortunately, it never happened in the past. It will not happen in the future. Hamas was ready to fight. We did Gilad Shalit and not stop a war between Israel on this issue. Gilad Shalit didn't come back after the end of the war. He came back after a prisoners exchange deal.
Unfortunately, this issue is not going to be going away, so we're going to be able to come back to it. We're going to move on now. One of Syria's most important rocket scientists, Aziz Azbar, was killed over the weekend in a car bombing. Many believe it was a targeted assassination, but who did it remains an open question. Now, the New York Times spoke with an unnamed senior official from a Middle Eastern intelligence agency who says the Mossad, Israel's spy agency, carried out the killing. Now, the Times says the intelligence official was, quote, informed about the operation. Now, why was Azbar a target? He reportedly was part of a top-secret weapons development unit called Sector 4, which developed precision-guided missiles against Israeli cities. Let me bring back in our guests here. Ruthie, how likely do you think it is that Israel was, in fact, behind this killing?
Well, you know, it's interesting you should ask that. I think it is likely, and I'm delighted if it is Israel that did it. But there is a terrorist organization in Syria that claimed responsibility for it, formerly the Al-Nusra Front. They came out and said, we did it. I find it hard to believe because it was a complex operation, and it has been said that Israel has been following this particular scientist. So I would say it's more likely that the Mossad did it, but I don't know. All I'm saying is good riddance, and I'm glad he's dead.
Yariv, according to the Times, he had access to the highest levels of government in Syria, in Iran. He was working with Soleimani. I mean, this guy would fit his profile would fit on a list of the 10 most wanted.
Yes, and also we heard some Israeli ministers that are not saying that Israel did it, but they are saying that they don't know who did it, but they're happy about the result, and everyone can understand things from that. I think that in this system of target killing abroad, there are two major questions that we have to ask ourselves, and unfortunately we don't have so much answers because it's all very secret. But the first one is what is the risk for this kind of an action? Because when it succeeds, everyone can be happy and be supportive. What will happen when it's not succeed, and what are the risks with taking this action, and what are the impact of that? Whether it's really a necessary thing to kill him or not, I don't know. I have no information for that. And the second thing that we have to ask ourselves is also a moral question. Who is making the decision which person is going to live and which person is going to die, and whether it's so easy to make the decision to kill people? We heard about killing some scientists, people in Malaysia, in other places.
Iran, Iraq in the 70s.
And you know,
wouldn't be the first time.
For sure we need to fight ourselves and to protect ourselves, and we have the legitimacy to do so. But what is a ticking bomb? What is a scientist and what is a terrorist? And who is making the decision? And whether there is some kind of a system that is looking about this decision and saying this is the moral thing to do, this is the right thing to do. It's not so easy. It's not playing games. It's people's lives. And I think that we need to be very careful when we are acting in such a way.
I just want to add something to that. I agree with Yariv that there are moral questions and other considerations. I have faith in the Mossad and in the Israeli government that it doesn't do things lightly, frivolously. I actually believe that those things are taken into account.